Hi YouTube, back with another video. I just first wanted to say thank you to everyone who watched my previous video and left comments. I really appreciate the words of encouragement and support. Um, that really means a lot to me and to many other people who see the videos and read the comments who perhaps have not had the courage to speak up yet. So just wanted to give a little bit more background about my history, about my story, kind of a teaser if you will, because I don't have time to tell my entire story today. But for those of you that are interested, my story involves what I like to call a forcible adoption, which was when my sister and I were sort of taken from my mother, and intimidation techniques uh, were used to get her first to come and live with her sister, which became my adopted mother, and my sister's her sister's husband. They were both Jehovah's Witnesses. They could not have children of their own, and so they took advantage of my mother, who is somewhat, I would say, developmentally delayed, to come and stay with them on the auspices of giving her a better life and helping her get herself together and her situation in a better place than she was, since she was at that time involved in an abusive marriage. But it proceeded to where she went to work and my aunt, my adopted mother, stayed home to supposedly to take care of us kids. And when things were going south between my mom and her sister, they used some very serious threats and a background in pseudo law enforcement, what I'd call, to lead her to believe that it would be in her best interest and in our best interest to allow us to stay with them for a while. So she did return home to get her marriage together and to get some financial things in order. However, as things progressed, they started the process of intimidating her in such a way that they took advantage of her not being educated and not having resources. And it turned out that they actually kept us apart from my mother and proceeded on a cross-country journey, which seemed like it never really did end. Not sure if the adoption process was ever legalized. I don't see how it could have been. There were some papers that were filed, but I haven't actually seen those papers. But anyway, my sister and I went to live with my aunt and uncle. They insisted that we call us mom and dad. They insisted that we deny our mother basically ever existed. Told us that our biological father was probably dead. And of course, I came to find out later that that was not true, so I was lied to my whole entire life about that. And that we had no other siblings. No other siblings. So it was my older sister and I. We were 14 months apart. In 1984, approximately, we went to live with them. In 86, I believe it was, 86, 87, they told us to pack an overnight bag, and we wound up staying in Tennessee for a year. I now know that a lot of the moving around and the homeschooling us and the never staying in one place, moving around a lot, constantly staying on the road, practically living out of a van, was so that our real mother could not find us and our real father could not find us. She attempted to do so many times over the years, and that was kept from me until I reunited with her a few years ago as an adult. So a lot of lies, a lot of intimidation. They tried to get her to convert to the religion, and when they were unsuccessful, that was when they really got angry and aggressive with not only her but the entire family. But anyway, moving forward, we then lived in Montana for approximately a year in 88 to 89. During that period of time, they had a student, a lady that they had studied the Bible with, who was a widow and had 3 children, one still at home, one a young 10-year-old boy. Well, while we were in Montana, she had a stroke, a massive stroke at 38 years old. And so they came back to Florida and they took over this woman's life. They took over her property, her finances, her medical care, eventually had her to move in with us along with her son, which became our stepbrother in a way. But he never would conform to the rules of the house, which were extremely strict and unreasonable. And he had a lot of what they termed worldly influence because he attended public school. And so he had a bit of a clue about the real world and how it worked, even at that young of an age. So he was a couple of years older than my sister and I. And they treated him like a dog. They insisted that we shun him, even though he was not baptized, nor was he ever disfellowshipped, in our own home. And this was something that our survival sort of depended upon us doing everything that they told us to do. They were extremely abusive. They beat us on a regular basis. They starved us, deprived us of food, deprived us of any kind of friendship, even within the congregation. Of course, we were homeschooled, so we had very little contact with the outside world. Treated us like slaves. The house was always had to be spotless. I'm talking getting down on your hands and knees and scrubbing it with a toothbrush kind of spotless. The laundry had to be done. Their cars were always washed and waxed and vacuumed and their lawn mowed. I know because I did most of that work myself. My sister went to work at a very, very young age with our adoptive father. She started going with him at the age of 10 to his work and just sweeping up around the place that he was working at. That was the beginning of a very unusual circumstance, which eventually led to her death. But anyway, getting back to the childhood, this young man lived with us for approximately 5 years. And he kept running away from home. He was labeled as a problem child. He tried repeatedly to reach out to the counselor at his school. The police came to our home multiple times, returning him when he had run away, looking into the allegations of child abuse and neglect that he had made. And they would always keep him out of school until the bruises went away. So no confirmation of the child abuse was ever had at that time. So he finally ran away at 15 years old. And I'll never forget the last time that he came into our house. He came through the front door. The police had brought him back home. And my adopted mother, who was also, by the way, an intense alcoholic, she ran towards the front door and jumped on, a 225-pound woman, jumped on this young man and proceeded to beat him with her fist, punch him, kick him, until he was finally able to get away, and he ran out the front door. And I did not see him again for many years after that. So his life was completely destroyed. They even kept him away from his mother. They forced him to sleep in the garage and would lock him out at night to where he could not come inside and even use the bathroom. Kept him from socializing with his mother, kept him from socializing with my sister and I, because they said he was bad association, he was worldly. And I don't know if they intended for him to just disappear and run away, or if they thought they were going to reform him. I really don't know. But I carried a great deal of guilt for many years about the way that my sister and I were required, for our own survival, to keep from being beaten ourselves, were required to shun him. And of course, years later, I was able to make contact with him and sort of make peace with him over those childhood experiences. But a lot of guilt, a lot of guilt that I experienced and still do. Also experienced a lot of guilt for all of the people that I supposedly was helping to study the Bible, helping to come into the truth, and seeing the effect that it had long term on other people's lives. And knowing that I may have been responsible for getting people into this cult. people that I sincerely believe are good people, and I sincerely hope that they will be able to get out of it as I have been able to get out of it. But fast forwarding a little bit through my childhood years, we went back to Montana with this lady and her son who were living with us. And extreme financial abuse by my parents, extreme financial abuse. They took her car, they sold all of her possessions, they took all of her money, and up until a couple of years ago, they still maintain control of her money. So from the time that I was about 6 or 7 years old, I was literally being homeschooled, and I was learning my alphabet and learning my words and my colors and my shapes, and I was sitting in the floor basically giving speech therapy to this stroke victim. And I'll never forget doing the cards and showing the little cards and saying elephant, apple, orange, banana, lion, tiger, all of these different things, and helping her to be able to regain some of her speech. And even though she never was able to fully regain a mastery of language again, she was able to say certain words. I won't get into the whole that whole issue right now, but getting back to long story short, long story longer, of the childhood experiences, my sister and I were raised very strict among Jehovah's Witnesses. Everybody from A to Z, even in the congregation, was considered a bad association. We weren't allowed to go to parties. We weren't allowed to socialize, even amongst the witnesses, hardly at all. I think I remember one party that I was ever allowed to go to. And so it was a very isolating experience. And of course, it prevented us from sharing a lot of the abuses that were happening. There were a few people in the congregation that reached out from time to time in order to try and encourage us, in order to try to help us progress spiritually. And I think a lot of people could sense that there was something very wrong going on in our family, but they could never put their finger on it. And of course, every time people would try to get close, my parents would move to another congregation or move to another state. So they were this kind of gypsy ghost thing that they practiced. And whenever people would get too close, they would kind of disappear, stop going to meetings for a while, kind of fade away, and then come back. And when they came back, they'd go to a new congregation and be like, oh yeah, we were special pioneers, we did this, we've been to, all these territories that were underserved, and, we were members of law enforcement, and we did all these wonderful things. Which I feel there was some truth to that, but there was also a great deal of exaggeration. They also wanted people to admire them, respect them, fear them, whatever it took. And my adopted mother actually would say that my dad and she were pillars of the congregation. And so there were some very large egos that needed to be fed there. So we got relatively what I would call strong in the truth. I auxiliary pioneered in my teenage years. My sister got involved more in work. Now, in my congregation, even though secondary education was frowned upon, it was not made a huge deal of, because we had doctors and we had scientists and we had some very well-educated people in our congregation that were also big contributors and big supporters. So when I graduated high school, after being homeschooled at 15 years old, I graduated high school. My sister wanted to become a pilot, and she did. And I wanted to become a nurse. So I started going to college. Went to college for about 6 months. When I was 17, had just turned 18. In the month of December of 1998, my sister died at home in the bathtub. And it was ruled a drug overdose. It was ruled as a suicide. And basically that night, my childhood ended, and I just had to be a grown-up and handle her funeral arrangements, handle all the phone calls, the funeral home, the coroner's office, the police that came by to ask questions, all of these different things. At the same time, I'm caring for this lady who had a stroke that's still in our home after all these years. And And yeah, that was a very difficult time for me. My parents did not want to have a funeral service for her or memorial service at the Kingdom Hall. They had her cremated, and it wasn't until many years later that, see, I never could deal with, well, she wasn't depressed. She didn't seem like she was suicidal. She didn't take drugs, so why would she take a whole bottle of this pills and a whole bottle of that pills? It just never made sense to me. And there was this cognitive dissonance that was going on in my brain that there was just something so wrong about that. And I never could figure out what it was. Never made sense. So years later, fast forwarding, you know, I quit college. I got super involved with the congregation. My dad became an elder. Got involved in the regional building committee. I was in the first aid department. I was in the framing department. My dad got involved with the hospital liaison committee. He was congregation secretary for a while. He was able to go to the elder school. All these different privileges, constantly involved with the congregation and problems, not just on a local level, but on a, you know, problems that were going on in the circuit and problems that were going on in other congregations. Meanwhile, my adopted mother was battling with her alcoholism, which no one knew about. And I was constantly the peacemaker, the go-between. Oh, I would say, oh, Mom can't make it to the meeting today. She's sick. And then there was the whole thing where I was sitting there with my dad at the meetings, and he would put his arm around me, or he would hold my hand, even after I was grown. And he was always super affectionate, like public displays of affection and all that kind of stuff. But when people started asking if he was my husband, that's when it started to get really weird for me. Like, I was like, no, God, no, that's my dad, you know. So things were definitely not looking right to people on the outside looking in. But fast forwarding a few years, you know, the lady's still living in our home. We had gone on vacation, and my dad got really intoxicated. My mom was really intoxicated, and they were pushing alcohol on me, pushing alcohol on me the whole entire time. And I did drink with them. And I remember I went to my own room with the lady that was living with us. We had our own room in the cabin where we were staying. And I had said goodnight to my parents and all of that. And so I went to my room. And so my dad comes into the bedroom where I am with this other lady. I had my own bed. And he's like, oh, you know, your mom and I want you to come watch a movie with us. So I'm like, you know, okay. So I went into their bedroom, and there were two beds. And we started watching a movie. And then at that point was when he decided to fix me another drink, which I told him, no, I've had enough. I really don't want any more. He made drinks very strong. And I still remember he literally stood over me, and he was like, drink this, drink it down, like drink it all down. Standing over me, like holding the glass to my mouth. And of course, this whole, you know, I've been obedient, be in submission, you know, obedience was just going through my mind. So, you know, I just drank the drink and laid down on the other bed, was watching the movie, fell asleep. And at some point during the night, he decided to sexually assault me. Won't get too graphic with the details there because it's not necessary. But suffice it to say that I went into shock immediately, physical shock immediately, started shaking, just froze up. Have reason to believe that he actually drugged the drink that he gave me because I was paralyzed from the neck down. During this sexual assault, I could not move my arms or my legs, couldn't fight him off. So he did what he did, and I woke up very early in the morning, just by degrees, gradually waking up, like the memories coming back to me, and this horrible taste in my mouth, this horrible smell that I had never smelled before, that I'd never tasted before, and I was like, this can't be real. I just kept thinking, this can't be real, this can't be real, this can't be real. But I knew that it was real. And so he was able to function the next day enough to get us all loaded up in the vehicle and drive home. And all during the drive home, I'm thinking, what has just happened? This is horrible. This is a crisis. This is, I've got to leave my home as soon as I get there. I can't tell my mom. I can't tell anybody. Nobody's going to believe me. And so anyway, he had the ability to get us home. And he took me to the side when we got home, and he's like, listen, I really don't remember what happened, but I know some form of uncleanness or something happened between us. And I know that you were really intoxicated and you had too much to drink, like it was my idea, like it was my fault. It was all guilt and shame on me. And, you can't tell anybody and you can't go to the elders. And I'm like, but that's what we're supposed to do. This is a horrible, huge sin that's been committed. And of course I was feeling guilty as well about it at the time. And he took a full advantage of that, believe me. He's like, no, this was just uncleanness according to the Bible definition, and we need to just keep this between ourselves and pray about it, and Jehovah will forgive us. And this is a man that was able to, within 48 hours of coming home, conduct the book study at the Kingdom Hall after just having raped his daughter and knowing full well what he had done. And I'm sitting there in the audience looking at him thinking, you have no conscience. All of the things that you taught me about the Bible and about obedience and the congregation and subjection and morality and all of these things, I'm sitting there thinking, you're a sociopath. You have absolutely no conscience, because you're able to sit there and lecture people from the Bible on how they're supposed to live their life when you have knowingly just raped your own daughter. Adopted daughter, yes, but still, he was the only father I had ever known. So, I'm going to continue this a little bit later. I think that's enough for now for me to share. And, yeah, just think on that and think about what I said. And realize that sometimes these people who call themselves exemplary, who call themselves elders, are some of the biggest fraudsters and liars that there are out there. And they really do get desensitized by hearing these vivid, prurient details where people are supposed to come to them and confess all the details of their sins that they've supposedly committed. And I think that he was one that got caught up in that and was turned on in his own sick way. Not making excuses for him in any way, just saying that I do think that happened to him. And yeah, just realize that these people that set themselves up as Pharisees, as judges, as elders, as pillars of the community, they are not. They are just imperfect men. They make mistakes, and in some cases they are psychopaths, they're perverts. And so just don't subject yourself to that anymore. Don't subject yourself to these imperfect men who are really getting off on the power. So that's it for now, and I will come back and tell more of my story at a later date. Thanks for listening.